The training facility on Station Epsilon 7 hummed with activity as instructors from across the Galactic Union gathered for the annual combat assessment program. Humans had only joined the Union 3 years ago, and many species still questioned whether Earth's warriors could match the standards set by civilizations thousands of years. More advanced Ahi Morrison checked her rifle one more time before entering the main briefing hall. The weapon had belonged to her grandfather, then her father, and now her a modified M40A5 sniper rifle that was over 200 years old by human standards and seemed ancient compared to the gleaming energy weapons carried by her fellow instructors. The briefing hall filled quickly with warriors from a dozen different species. Katie took her seat near the back and tried to ignore the curious stares directed at both her and the rifle case beside her chair. Commander Zeln, a tall Peltharian with silver skin and 3 eyes, called the meeting to order and explained the purpose of today's gathering. Each instructor would demonstrate their primary weapon system and then participate in a live combat simulation to establish baseline competency scores for training the next generation of Union soldiers. Rax stood first. The Corthan warrior's massive frame made even the oversized furniture look small as he hefted his plasma accelerator onto the display table. The weapon featured auto-tracking capability, thermal imaging, and could fire 50 rounds per minute with each shot capable of melting through reinforced battle armor. My weapon represents 400 years of Corthan engineering excellence, Rax announced with obvious pride. The targeting computer can track up to 20 hostiles simultaneously, and the plasma core never needs recharging during combat operations. Several instructors nodded with appreciation, while others made notes on their data tablets. Lieutenant Kress went next. The Aquilin officer's energy lance hummed with barely contained power as she activated its display. Mode holographic projections showed how the weapon could disrupt molecular bonds at the atomic level and how its flight assist system allowed even untrained soldiers to achieve 90% accuracy, standard issue for all Aquilin flight cores. Kress explained. Weighs less than 2 kilograms and can switch between 6 different energy configurations, depending on target composition. Commander Zelm demonstrated his own weapon after that, a Gravia pulse rifle that could suppress entire areas with localized gravity wells and featured shields, capable of stopping most projectile and energy attacks. The weapon's power cell lasted for 3 days of continuous combat, and its tactical computer could interface with orbital support systems one by one. The instructor showcased weapons that seemed more like science fiction than reality. Each system featured artificial intelligence, automated targeting, self-repairing components, and enough firepower to level buildings. Then Commander Zeln called on Katie. She stood and carried her rifle case to the front. The room fell silent as she opened the case and lifted out her weapon compared to the sleek energy weapons displayed by her colleagues. Katie's rifle looked like something from a museum. The barrel was long and plain. The stock showed wear from decades of use. The scope mounted on top was purely optical with no electronic components. The bolt-action mechanism looked almost comically simple next to the complex system surrounding it. This is an M40A5 sniper rifle, Katie began in a steady voice. It fires a chemical propellant round at approximately 850 meters per second using a mechanical firing pin and spring-loaded bolt system. Silence greeted her words for a moment before someone in the back started laughing. Vrax leaned forward with an expression that might have been a smile on his fierce features. You brought a museum piece to a military assessment? More laughter rippled through the hall, and Katie kept her expression neutral. The rifle uses no power cells, she continued. No electronic targeting, no automated systems. It requires manual operation for each shot and holds 5 rounds in an internal magazine. Fascinating, Commander Zeln said in a tone that suggested he found it anything but fascinating. And how exactly does this primitive device compare to modern weapon systems? Katie met his three-eyed gaze without flinching. It works in any environment underwater. In vacuum, during electromagnetic pulse attacks, there are no computers to hack, no power systems to fail, no electronic signatures to track. Lieutenant Kress shook her head. But surely the accuracy suffers without computer assistance? And the rate of fire must be terribly slow compared to energy weapons. The accuracy depends on the operator. Katie replied. A trained sniper can hit targets at over 1,000 meters consistently. As for rate of fire, that also depends on training. Vrax stood up and his voice boomed across the hall. Commander Zeln, I propose we test these claims. Let each instructor run the combat simulation, and we will see how primitive human technology performs against advanced systems. Other instructors voiced their agreement, and Katie could see the challenge in their eyes. They wanted to prove that their advanced civilizations had rendered human weapons obsolete. Commander Zelm considered the proposal for a moment, then nodded. Very well. We will run the standard simulation with 50 combat drones programmed for Special Forces level difficulty. Each instructor will be scored on targets, eliminated and time required. I accept, Katie said quietly. Excellent, Vrax rumbled. I look forward to seeing how many targets you can hit before your ancient weapon fails you. The betting started immediately among the gathered instructors and their assistants. Most wagers predicted Katie would eliminate fewer than 10 drones. Before being overwhelmed or suffering equipment malfunction, Katie returned to her seat and began preparing her ammunition while the others discussed the upcoming demonstrations. She selected 8 rounds from her case and loaded 5 into the rifle's magazine with 3 extras in her pocket. One of the Paltharian assistants noticed and whispered something to his neighbor. Both of them started laughing, and the sound spread as others learned that the human instructor planned to enter the simulation with only 8 rounds total. 8 bullets? Kress asked in disbelief. The simulation contains 50 combat drones. Even if you hit with every single shot, you will still be overwhelmed. 8 rounds will be sufficient. Katie replied calmly. Vrax laughed so hard his armor rattled. This is either incredible confidence or incredible foolishness. I cannot wait to discover which. Commander Zeln announced that demonstrations would begin in 1 hour. The instructors would compete in order of seniority, which meant Vrax would go first, followed by Zeln himself, then Kress, and finally Katie. As the meeting broke up and instructors headed to the observation deck overlooking the simulation arena, Katie remained seated and reviewed the technical specifications for the combat drones. They would face each drone featured adaptive learning algorithms, energy shields, and multiple weapon systems. She studied their behavioral patterns and tactical protocols while around her. The other instructors boasted about their expected scores and placed more bets on how badly the human would fail. Katie closed her eyes and controlled her breathing. She had learned long ago that patience was a weapon more powerful than any technology. Her instructors at Scout Sniper School had drilled that lesson into her through months of grueling training. When the hour elapsed and Commander Zeln called everyone to the observation deck, Katie stood and slung her rifle over her shoulder. The weapon felt comfortable and familiar, an extension of her own body after 20 years of practice. Vrax noticed her calm demeanor, and his expression shifted slightly. Perhaps he recognized something in her stance that reminded him of warriors from his own species' history before they had become dependent on advanced technologies. The observation deck filled with spectators. Word had spread about the unusual demonstration, and officers from throughout the station came to watch the human instructor attempt the impossible with her primitive weapon. Katie took her position at the entrance to the simulation arena and waited for her turn. She would show them exactly what a trained human warrior could accomplish when technology was stripped away and only skill remained. The mocking would end soon enough. The simulation arena stretched out like an urban warfare nightmare. 3 levels of buildings with narrow corridors, open courtyards, and countless positions where combat drones could hide or ambush. The facility's computers could generate 50 autonomous drones that adapted to tactics in real time and learned from each engagement. Commander Zelm stood at the observation deck controls and explained the rules. One final time each instructor would face the same scenario with drones programmed to Special Forces difficulty levels. Scoring would be based on targets eliminated, time required, and efficiency of ammunition. USA's Rax stepped forward first and hefted his plasma accelerator with confidence. The massive Korthan warrior had trained for over 30 years, and his weapon represented the pinnacle of his species. Military technology. The simulation began, and drones poured into the arena from multiple entry points. They moved with mechanical precision and immediately began coordinating their search patterns. Rax opened fire, and the plasma accelerator lived up to its reputation. The auto-tracking system locked onto targets faster than any organic eye could follow, and bolts of superheated plasma reduced drones to molten slag within seconds. The observation deck filled with impressed murmurs as Vrax moved through the arena like a force of nature. His weapons computer identified threats before they could establish firing positions, and the thermal imaging cut through smoke and shadows. 4 minutes into the engagement, Vrax had eliminated 32 drones, but the remaining 18 had adapted to his tactics. They stopped moving in predictable patterns and began using the environment for cover, while jamming his thermal sensors with scattered heat sources. The Korthan warrior adjusted his strategy and began firing at cover positions to force the drones into the open. But his ammunition counter showed he'd expended nearly 70% of his plasma core's charge. At the 6-minute mark, Vrax eliminated his final target, 32 drones destroyed in a display of overwhelming firepower that drew applause from the watching officers. Commander Zelm went next, and his gravitic pulse rifle offered a completely different approach to combat. Instead of direct fire, he used the weapon's area suppression capabilities to disable multiple drones simultaneously. Pulse rifle created localized gravity wells that crushed drones against walls or pinned them to the floor, where they could be eliminated at leisure. Zelm's tactical computer interfaced with the arena systems to track drone movements through multiple levels. His methodical approach took longer, but proved effective. After 5 minutes, he had eliminated 28 drones, and the remaining targets struggled against the constant gravity manipulation that made normal movement impossible. Several drones attempted vertical escapes using thrust systems, but Zelm's weapon tracked them easily and increased the gravity field strength until their internal components failed under the pressure. Lieutenant Kress entered the arena with her energy lance and immediately demonstrated why Aquilan flight corps dominated aerial combat throughout the Union. She moved with incredible speed, and the lance's molecular disruption setting tore through drone armor like it was made of paper. Her aggressive assault caught the drones off balance, and within 3 minutes, she had eliminated 35 targets. The observation deck erupted in cheers at her performance, but then her power cell meter flashed a warning. The Lance's high output setting drained energy faster than standard combat parameters, and Kress found herself forced to retreat as the remaining 15 drones coordinated a counterattack. She switched to a lower power setting and managed to eliminate 8 more targets before her weapon went completely dead. 43 total eliminations in an impressive but ultimately incomplete victory. Watching officers discussed the demonstrations with excitement. Vrax's raw power, Zelm's tactical control, and Kress's speed had all been remarkable to witness, and the scores would be difficult to beat then. Katie Morrison stepped forward with her ancient rifle and 8 rounds of ammunition. The laughter started again as she entered the arena. Several officers made jokes about how quickly she would be eliminated and whether human pride would allow her to quit before being overwhelmed. Katie ignored the commentary, and requested something that surprised everyone. She asked for full access to the diagnostic data from the 3 previous simulation runs. Commander Zelln hesitated, but then granted the request. Katie spent 5 minutes studying the recorded footage and analyzing the behavioral patterns exhibited by the combat drones. "She is stalling," someone whispered loud enough for Katie to hear through her helmet communication system, trying to find excuses for her inevitable failure. Another voice agreed. Katie finished her analysis and moved to an elevated position in the northwest section of the arena, a partially collapsed building with clear sightlines. Across multiple approach vectors, the simulation began and 50 fresh combat drones materialized throughout the arena. Their sensors immediately began scanning for threats, and their weapon systems activated. Katie did not move. She lay perfectly still in a prone position with her rifle aimed at a specific point 100 meters away. Her breathing slowed to barely perceptible levels, and her body temperature dropped as she controlled her metabolism using techniques taught by Marine Corps Scout sniper instructors. 2 minutes passed, and the drones began their search patterns. They moved with confidence after adapting to the tactics used by the previous 3 instructors and expected either overwhelming firepower or advanced technology. Katie remained motionless, and her lack of electronic signature made her invisible to their sensors. They could not track what did not emit heat, electromagnetic radiation, or movement. At the 2-minute 30-second mark, a drone patrol moved into position exactly where Katie had predicted during her analysis of their behavioral patterns. She fired. The chemical propellant round crossed 100 meters in a fraction of a second and struck the lead drone in its central processor. The machine dropped instantly, but more importantly, it fell directly onto a pressure-sensitive plate that controlled arena environmental systems. The plate triggered an emergency fire suppression activated in that Section 6 drones. Caught in the resulting chaos, were thrown against walls by the sudden blast of compressed gas, and their delicate sensors shattered on impact. 7 drones eliminated. With 1 bullet, the observation deck fell completely silent as officers scrambled to review what had just happened. Commander Zelln replayed the shot 3 times, trying to understand if the human had been lucky or if that outcome had been planned. Katie chambered her second round with smooth efficiency and moved to a different position. She understood that the drones would analyze the shot trajectory and converge on her previous location. 4 drones appeared in the courtyard below and began systematic sweeps with their weapon systems active. Katie aimed at a support beam that held up a metal catwalk suspended above them. Her second shot severed the beam and the catwalk collapsed. 4 drones were crushed beneath tons of metal grating and structural components. 11 drones eliminated with 2 bullets. Vrax stood up in the observation deck, and his voice carried disbelief. "She's not just shooting drones. She's manipulating the environment itself." Lieutenant Kress pulled up a tactical overlay and highlighted the areas where Katie had fired. "Each shot creates cascade effects." She studied our runs to understand how the drones would respond and positioned herself accordingly. Katie's third shot targeted a fuel cell on a transport drone that was carrying supplies for the combat units. The exploding fuel created a chain reaction that engulfed 8 nearby drones in a fireball that their shields could not withstand. 19 drones eliminated with 3 bullets. Betting pools in the observation deck had stopped entirely. Officers who had mocked the humans' primitive weapon now watched in stunned silence as she systematically dismantled the simulation using nothing but perfect marksmanship and environmental awareness. Katie moved again, and this time she vanished completely from sight. The remaining 31 drones coordinated their response and began hunting in pack formation with overlapping sensor coverage, but they were looking for electronic signatures, heat sources, and movement patterns. They had no protocols for tracking a completely silent opponent who moved like a ghost and left No trace. Katie's fourth shot came from an unexpected angle and pierced through a drone carrying the communication relay that coordinated the pack's tactical network. Instantly, the remaining 30 drones lost their synchronized movements and scattered in confusion. She had studied their behavior during the previous runs and knew exactly which target to eliminate. To create maximum disruption, 20 drones eliminated with 4 bullets, and the alien officers finally understood they were not watching a demonstration of primitive technology. They were witnessing the application of human combat doctrine refined through centuries of warfare where technology could fail at any moment. Katie Morrison had 4 bullets remaining and 30 drones left to eliminate. The real lesson was just beginning. The observation deck had transformed from a place of mockery into something resembling a tactical operations center. Every officer present now studied Katie's movements with intense focus while trying to understand how a human with outdated technology was outperforming their most advanced weapon systems. Commander Zelln pulled up multiple camera angles and replayed Katie's 4 shots in sequence. Each bullet had been placed with surgical precision to create effects far beyond simple target elimination. She is not fighting like we do, Zelln said quietly to Vrax, who stood beside him with arms crossed and an expression that mixed respect with disbelief. We use technology to overcome obstacles, but she uses obstacles as weapons themselves. Vrax nodded slowly, and his warriors' instincts recognized something his species had lost generations ago when they became dependent on plasma accelerators and auto-tracking systems. My ancestors fought this way. Before we had advanced weapons, they learned to turn every battle space into an advantage. In the arena below, Katie had positioned herself near the water treatment section where coolant pipes supplied the facilities. Environmental systems. She understood that the combat drones relied on thermal sensors and electromagnetic detection, but human snipers were trained to minimize both signatures. The 30 scattered drones began regrouping after losing their communication relay. Their individual tactical computers were sophisticated enough to operate independently, but they lacked the coordinated efficiency of a networked system. Katie waited, and her patience was a weapon the drones could not counter. They had been programmed to expect engagement within specific timeframes based on how organic warriors typically behaved. 10 minutes passed with no additional shots fired. Several officers in the observation deck grew restless and wondered if Katie had withdrawn from the simulation or if her weapon had malfunctioned. Lieutenant Kress checked the tracking systems and confirmed the human was still in the arena, but her exact location remained unknown. How can our sensors not find her? Kress asked with frustration evident in her voice. Even without active electronic signatures, we should detect body heat or movement. An older Paltharian officer who had remained silent until now spoke up. She has training we do not. Human warriors learn to control their physiology in ways our species never needed because we always had technology to augment our natural abilities. The drones completed their regrouping and formed a defensive perimeter in the arena's central courtyard. Their programming recognized the threat pattern now. They faced an opponent who struck from unexpected angles and then vanished. Katie observed their formation from her concealed position and noted how they had arranged themselves for mutual support with overlapping fields of fire. Any conventional assault would trigger immediate response from multiple directions. She aimed her rifle at the emergency power junction that controlled the arena's main lighting system. The shot would alert every drone to her position, but the tactical advantage would be worth the risk. Her fifth shot shattered the junction, and the arena plunged into darkness except for scattered emergency lights that provided minimal illumination. The drones immediately activated night vision protocols and began scanning with infrared sensors, but Katie had been lying motionless for over 20 minutes, and her body temperature had dropped to match the ambient environment. The cooling effect of the concrete she lay on, combined with controlled breathing and metabolism, made her invisible to thermal imaging. The drones moved in standard search patterns designed by military programmers who assumed opponents would either flee or attack when lights failed. They did not anticipate a warrior trained to become part of the environment. Katie moved during the confusion and relocated to the coolant pipe access point she had identified earlier. The massive valve that controlled flow to the entire section could be opened manually, but doing so would flood the lower arena levels with pressurized coolant. She positioned herself carefully and aimed at the valve's electronic lock mechanism. The mechanical override would activate once the electronic system failed. Her sixth shot destroyed the lock, and the valve began opening as backup safety protocols engaged. Pressurized coolant designed to operate at near-freezing temperatures erupted from multiple pipe connections. The drones caught in the lower sections had shields designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, but they had no defense against liquid flooding. Coolant seeped into their joints and sensor housings while the temperature dropped rapidly. 14 drones shorted out as their internal systems froze and their tactical computers crashed from thermal shock. They had been designed to operate in various environments, but not to withstand sudden immersion in sub-zero coolant fluid. Katie's count stood at 34 drones eliminated with 6 bullets fired. 16 drones remained, and they were the command units, more heavily armored, equipped with redundant systems, and programmed with advanced tactical algorithms that made them far more dangerous than standard combat drones. These units had survived by staying on the upper levels where the coolant could not reach them, and now they understood the threat they faced. Their tactical analysis concluded that the human was using environmental warfare rather than direct engagement. The command units formed a tight defensive cluster in the arena's highest structure and activated maximum sensor range. They would detect any approach and respond with overwhelming coordinated fire. Katie studied their position through her scope and noted something the drones had not considered. Their defensive formation placed them all within range of each other's shield systems. The command units used synchronized shield technology that allowed them to share defensive capacity. If one unit took damage, the others could redirect shield energy to reinforce the weakened position. But synchronized systems had a fundamental vulnerability that Katie had learned about during her research on Galactic Union technology. The shields required a brief refresh cycle where all units dropped their defenses simultaneously to prevent feedback loops. The cycle lasted less than 1 second and occurred every 30 seconds according to the technical specifications. She had memorized. Katie watched the command units through her scope and controlled her breathing. Her heart rate slowed, and the world seemed to narrow to just her, the rifle, and the targets 1,000 meters away. She counted the seconds in her head: 28, 29, 30. The shields flickered and dropped for their mandatory refresh cycle. Katie fired her 7th shot. The bullet crossed the distance in the time it took for a human heart to beat once. It struck the lead command drone's sensor cluster during the brief moment when shields were inactive. The bullet continued through the damaged drone and fragmented inside the second unit's processing core. Pieces of the projectile ricocheted off the armored hull, and one fragment struck the third drone's exposed joint assembly. Fourth command drone immediately began evasive maneuvers, but Katie had calculated this response. Her 7th shot had been aimed not just at the drones, but at the structural support beam directly above their position. The fragmented bullet and ricocheting debris had weakened the beam enough that it began to fail under the weight of the observation equipment it supported. Metal groaned and then gave way. The 4th command drone attempted to thrust clear, but tons of metal and equipment crashed down and crushed it. Beneath the collapse, 4 command units eliminated with a single bullet that never directly hit the 4th target. Katie chambered her 8th and final round, while the remaining 12 drones broke formation and scattered throughout the arena. They had analyzed her tactics and determined that grouping together made them vulnerable to cascade effects. The observation deck remained silent as officers witnessed something that contradicted everything they knew about modern warfare. Single warrior with primitive technology was systematically defeating advanced combat systems. Through nothing but skill, patience, and perfect understanding of cause and effect, Commander Zell leaned forward and his three eyes tracked Katie's movement as she relocated one final time. She has 1 bullet remaining and 12 targets mathematically impossible even. With her environmental manipulation tactics, Vrax said nothing, but his expression suggested he was no longer certain what was possible or impossible when it came to human combat capabilities. The 12 remaining drones spread throughout the arena and activated full sensor sweeps. They would find her eventually, even without electronic signatures. Katie moved to the arena's eastern edge where structural damage from the earlier coolant flood had weakened a primary support column. The column held up a significant portion of the facility's upper framework. She aimed her rifle at a specific point on the column, where stress fractures had formed from the temperature shock of the coolant exposure. Her hands were steady and her breathing controlled. As she prepared to fire the 8th bullet, the drones were closing in on her position and would reach her within 30 seconds. Katie fired. The final bullet struck the fracture point with perfect precision and the damaged column began to fail. The structural integrity collapsed in a cascade that spread through the connected framework. Metal shrieked as support beams twisted and gave way. Sections of the upper arena structure came down in a controlled demolition that Katie had engineered. Through her understanding of building stress points, the 12 remaining drones were caught in the collapse. Katie emerged from the simulation arena covered in dust but unharmed. She cleared her rifle according to standard safety protocols and secured the weapon in its case before heading to the observation deck where every officer stood frozen and stunned. Silence. Commander Zone was the first to speak, and his voice carried none of the dismissive tone from earlier. I need to see the complete tactical breakdown. Immediately run every diagnostic and verify the simulation data. Multiple technicians scrambled to comply, and within minutes, holographic displays filled the observation deck with detailed analysis of Katie's performance. The numbers told a story that seemed impossible. 8 shots fired with 0 misses, 50 targets eliminated through direct hits and cascade effects stole ammunition expenditure. 8 standard chemical propellant rounds valued at approximately 2 credits each. By comparison, Vrax had expended 70% of a plasma core worth 800 credits. Zeln had used 65% of a gravitic cell worth 1,000 credits. And Lieutenant Kress had completely drained an energy cell worth 1,200 credits. The cost-effectiveness alone was staggering, but the tactical implications were what truly shook the gathered officers. Vrax approached Katie directly and his massive frame towered over her, but his voice carried genuine respect rather than mockery. How is this possible? We have weapons that can track targets through walls and fire 50 rounds per minute. Yet you defeated the same simulation with 8 bullets from a weapon that requires manual operation. Katie set her rifle case down and met the Corton's gaze without hesitation. Your weapons are impressive, but they make you predictable. The drones were programmed based on tactical doctrines used by species who rely on technology. Explain. Commander Zelm demanded as he joined them with Lieutenant Kress close behind. Every advanced weapon system in this room shares common characteristics. Katie began in a calm teaching voice. They use automated targeting. They generate electronic signatures. They require power systems that emit heat. And they encourage aggressive engagement because ammunition capacity seems unlimited. She gestured to the holographic replay showing Vrax's demonstration. The drones adapted to expect overwhelming firepower, so they developed countermeasures, scatter tactics, jamming, using cover to force ammunition expenditure. Lieutenant Kress studied the data with growing understanding. But your rifle has none of those signatures, no electronics to track. Minimal heat generation. No automated systems broadcasting your position. Correct. Katie confirmed. But more importantly, I was trained to fight without those advantages human military doctrine assumes. Technology will fail. The Paltharian officer who had spoken earlier stepped forward. This is the key difference. We developed advanced technology and built our tactics around it, but humans developed tactics first and used technology to enhance those fundamentals. Katie nodded. Every Marine qualifies with this rifle before being issued advanced weapons. We learn breath control, range estimation, wind reading, patience, and environmental awareness because those skills work regardless of technology level. Vrax pulled up the moment when Katie had waited over 10 minutes without firing. This patience is not something Corthan warriors practice anymore. We have auto-tracking systems, so we attack immediately upon target acquisition. That is exactly why the drones found you predictable. Katie explained. Their programming assumed you would behave according to your species' standard tactics. Commander Zeln walked through the holographic replay and paused at Katie's fifth shot that disabled the arena lighting. You turned there. Advantages into vulnerabilities, their night vision. Systems assumed targets would generate heat signatures, but you controlled your body temperature. Scout sniper training. Katie said simply, we learned to regulate metabolism, minimize movement, and become part of the terrain. These techniques were developed by human hunters thousands of years before we had any advanced technology. Lieutenant Kress examined the data on Katie's sixth shot that flooded the arena with coolant. You memorized the facility schematics during your preparation period. Environmental awareness. Katie confirmed. Understanding the battle space is fundamental to human combat doctrine. We map exits, identify hazards, locate resources, and plan multiple contingencies before engagement begins. An Aquilon officer in the back raised his hand hesitantly. But surely, this approach only works against drones. Living opponents would adapt faster than machines. Katie's expression remained neutral, but her eyes showed the confidence of someone who had survived actual combat. The simulation drones were programmed based on actual combat data from special forces across the Union. They adapted using the same tactical algorithms your species employ. Silence followed that observation as the implications settled over the gathered officers. Vrax spoke. The thought that troubled many present. If one human with a primitive rifle can defeat systems designed to counter our best technology, what happens when Earth fields an entire military force? Katie picked up her rifle case. That is the wrong question. The rifle is not primitive. It is proven. 200 years of continuous use in every environment. Earth offers from Arctic to desert to vacuum. She looked around at the assembled officers who represented civilizations thousands of years older than humanity. The question you should ask is why your species abandoned the fundamental skills that make warriors effective, regardless of technology. Commander, Zeln's three eyes blinked in sequence as he processed that rebuke delivered without anger or judgment. Just plain. Statement of fact. Human military history is unbroken warfare for our entire existence as a species. Katie continued. We have fought each other with every weapon imaginable, and we learned that technology advances, but fundamentals remain constant. She opened her rifle case and removed the weapon. This rifle works when power fails, when electronics are jammed, when you are cut off from support. It works because human hands and human judgment are the only systems it requires. Lieutenant Kress examined her own energy lens with new perspective. We have become dependent on technology to compensate for skills we never developed. Not never developed, you abandoned them. The Paltharian officer corrected. My species once trained warriors in patience and environmental awareness, but when we invented energy weapons, those skills seemed obsolete. Vrax growled low in his throat. a sound that conveyed frustration at himself rather than anger at others. Corthan legends speak of warriors who could track prey for days and strike with perfect precision. We called them primitive and focused on plasma accelerators. Katie reassembled her rifle with practiced efficiency. Technology should enhance capability, not replace it. A human soldier with advanced weapons is dangerous, but a human soldier who can fight without them is adaptable. Commander Zelm made a decision that would affect training programs throughout the Galactic Union. I want full documentation of human combat training methods if we are to integrate Earth forces into Union military operations. Then we must understand these fundamental skills. I can provide training, Katie offered, but I need to be clear about something. First, learning these skills takes years of practice, and most species who attempt it will quit before achieving competency. Vrax's expression showed determination. I wish to learn. My pride has already been humbled today, and I would rather be a student than remain ignorant. Other officers voiced similar interest, and Katie realized the mockery had transformed into genuine desire to understand what made human warriors effective. Lieutenant Kress asked the question that many were thinking. Why did Earth develop such intensive training when other species relied on technology? What drove humans to maintain these ancient skills? Katie's answer was simple and chilling. Earth had no unified government until recently. We spent 10,000 years fighting ourselves, and every advance in weapons technology was immediately countered by someone else. She gestured to her rifle. This design survived because it could not be jammed, hacked, or rendered obsolete by electronic countermeasures. It worked in world wars, regional conflicts, and asymmetric warfare. You fought yourselves constantly, Commander Zeln said with something like horror in his voice. Your species achieved spaceflight while still conducting warfare on your homeworld. Yes, Katie confirmed without shame or apology. And that history of conflict taught us lessons that peaceful species never learned. We know what happens when you depend too heavily on technology, because we have seen it fail. Vrax understood something in that moment that changed his perspective on humanity entirely. You are not primitive. You are hardened by necessity. Earth forged warriors in an environment where weakness meant extinction. Katie nodded. Every human soldier carries knowledge passed down through generations of combat. We learn from ancestors who fought with spears, swords, muskets, and rifles. The tools changed, but the principles remained. The observation deck had become an impromptu classroom, and Katie found herself surrounded by officers who wanted to know more about human training methods, combat philosophy, and tactical doctrine. She spent the next hour answering questions and demonstrating techniques that seemed simple on the surface, but required years to master. Breath control for steady aim, reading environmental factors, patience under pressure, and calculated risk assessment. Commander Zeln watched Katie interact with the other instructors. 6 months passed, and Station Epsilon 7 transformed from a conventional military training facility into something unprecedented in Galactic Union history, a place where advanced species learn ancient combat skills from the newest member civilization. Katie Marson stood in the modified training yard and watched as 40 alien soldiers struggled with unpowered rifles that forced them to rely on fundamental marksmanship rather than automated targeting systems. Vrax lay prone beside 3 Peltharian soldiers, and the massive Cortan's breathing had finally steadied enough for accurate shooting after weeks of practice. He squeezed the trigger slowly, and his round struck within 2 centimeters of the target center at 300 meters. Better, Katie called out. But you are still anticipating the recoil. Let the shot surprise you. The Peltharian soldiers fired their own rounds with varying degrees of success. One hit near the target center, while the other 2 missed completely due to poor breathing control. Lieutenant Kress had adapted quickly to human training methods and now served as Katie's assistant instructor. The Aquilan officer moved between firing positions and offered corrections in a firm but patient teaching. Voice. Your scope is just a tool for observation. Press reminded a frustrated Aquilin trainee. The shot comes from your body position, breathing rhythm, and trigger discipline. Technology cannot replace these fundamentals. Commander Zeln observed from the command tower and reviewed training data that showed remarkable progress over 6 months. Soldiers who had initially struggled to hit stationary targets at 50 meters could now engage moving targets at 500 meters using only optical sights and trained judgment. The morning session focused on marksmanship, but afternoons were dedicated to fieldcraft, the art of moving through terrain without being detected, reading environmental conditions, and understanding how to use natural features for concealment. Katie led a mixed squad of Korthan, Peltharian, and Aquilin soldiers through a forested simulation environment. She moved silently while the aliens crashed through undergrowth and snapped branches despite their best efforts. Stop, Katie commanded, and the squad froze. You are thinking about hiding from sensors, but I need you to understand something fundamental. Human hunters developed these skills before any electronic detection existed. She demonstrated proper foot placement that minimized sound, body positioning that broke up visual profile, and movement timing that used environmental noise for concealment. Vrax attempted to duplicate her movements, and his massive frame actually succeeded in moving quietly for several meters before a misstep revealed his position. This is harder than defeating an enemy in direct combat. That is because direct combat relies on strength and firepower, Katie explained. Fieldcraft requires patience and awareness, skills that take years to develop, but once learned, they never fail. The training program had attracted attention throughout the Union. Military command structure and observers from a dozen species regularly visited to assess whether human methods could be integrated into their own forces. A Korthan admiral arrived during the afternoon session and watched Vrax demonstrate breath control techniques he had learned over months of practice. The admiral's expression showed surprise at seeing his own species warrior using such ancient methods. After the training ended, the admiral requested a private meeting with Katie and Commander Zone. I have reviewed the performance data from students who completed your program. The admiral began without preamble. Combat simulations show a 35% improvement in target elimination rates and a 40% reduction in ammunition expenditure. Katie nodded but offered context. Those numbers reflect students who have trained for 6 months. True mastery requires years of continuous practice. Nevertheless, these results are significant. The admiral continued. I am authorizing expansion of this training to all Korthan Special Forces units. We have relied too long on technology and forgotten the warrior skills our ancestors valued. Commander Zaun looked pleased. Other species have made similar requests. The Peltharian Military Command wants to integrate human fieldcraft into their reconnaissance training, and the Aquilin Flight Corps is developing a program based on human situational awareness techniques. The admiral's next words carried weight that suggested they came from higher authority. There is another matter. Border conflicts with the Vrikith Collective have intensified, and Union Command is concerned that our dependence on advanced technology makes us vulnerable to electronic warfare. Katie understood where this conversation was heading. You want human forces involved in combat operations? Yes, the admiral confirmed. Specifically, we want human advisors embedded with Union units to teach adaptive tactics in the field. If our technology fails, we need soldiers who can continue fighting effectively. That is a significant commitment, Katie said carefully. Human combat doctrine is not something that can be taught through brief deployments. It requires cultural change in how your militaries approach warfare. Commander Zeln intervened, which is why we are proposing long-term integration human instructors at every major training facility and human tactical advisors at the division level for all Union forces. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed logistics, training timelines, and the cultural challenges of convincing advanced civilizations to adopt methods from a species that had only joined the Union 3 years ago. That evening, Katie found Vrax practicing in the rifle range long after official training hours ended. The Korthan warrior fired shot after shot with mechanical precision, and his groupings had improved dramatically. "You should rest," Katie said as she approached his position. Vrax ejected his magazine and set the rifle down with reverence that would have seemed absurd 6 months ago. "I cannot stop thinking about how much I have learned. For 30 years, I believed my plasma accelerator made me a superior warrior." He looked at his hands, massive and powerful, but now trained in delicate trigger control and subtle body positioning. "You showed me that I had become dependent on technology to compensate for skills I never developed. Your ancestors knew these skills," Katie reminded him. "You are not learning something foreign. You are reclaiming knowledge that your species abandoned." Vrax's expression showed something like shame. "When you demonstrated your rifle that first day, I laughed. I thought human weapons were primitive because they lacked automated systems. And now?" Katie asked, though she knew the answer. "Now I understand that the weapon is not what makes a warrior effective," Vrax said with conviction. "It is the training, discipline, and judgment that the warrior brings to any weapon." Katie picked up one of the training rifles and checked its condition out of habit. "The Galactic Union has incredible technology that humans cannot match, but technology should enhance capability, not replace fundamental skills. You have taught us more than combat techniques," Vrax said thoughtfully. "You have shown us that advancement does not mean abandoning the wisdom of our ancestors." Lieutenant Kress joined them in the range, and her appearance suggested she had been seeking Katie specifically. "Command just received reports from the border. A Union patrol encountered Vrikath forces using advanced electronic warfare that disabled all our weapon systems." Katie's expression remained calm. "Casualties?" "None," Kress replied with something like pride in her voice. "The patrol included 6 soldiers who completed your training program. When their energy weapons failed, they switched to backup chemical propellant rifles and held position until reinforcements arrived." Vrax stood up with interest evident on his features. "They adapted without technology?" "Exactly as they were trained," Kress confirmed. "The patrol leader's report specifically mentioned using environmental awareness and patience to counter superior numbers human doctrine applied in actual combat conditions." Katie felt satisfaction at hearing her students had survived a real engagement. That is what this training is designed for, preparing warriors to fight effectively regardless of circumstances. The 3 of them stood in the rifle range and shared a moment of understanding that transcended species. They were all warriors, committed to mastering their craft, and that bond mattered more than technological advantages. Over the following months, Katie's training program expanded throughout the Union military structure. Soldiers from every member species learned to shoot without auto-targeting, move without electronic signature, and think tactically without computer assistance. The cultural shift was slow but undeniable. Species that had relied on technology for thousands of years began to appreciate the value of fundamental skills that humans had maintained through continuous warfare. Katie received reports of successful engagements where Union forces adapted to equipment failures by applying human combat doctrine. Her students proved that technology enhanced capability, but training provided true resilience. 9 months after her demonstration with 8 bullets, Katie attended a ceremony at Union military headquarters. She stood beside Vrax, Commander Zelm, and Lieutenant Kress, while a Galactic Council representative presented her with the rank of Chief Combat Instructor for all Union forces. The representative's speech acknowledged what the demonstration had revealed, that humanity brought unique value to the Union, not through matching advanced technology, but through combat wisdom, earned across 10,000 years of conflict.